The first time I heard Heartbreak Hotel, it felt like a punch to the gut. I was 15, and my whole world was about to explode. Before that moment, everything seemed gray and dull, like I was just going through the motions. But when Elvis Presley's voice hit my ears, it was like a bolt of lightning. It was the first time I felt truly alive. I remember sitting in my room, listening to the radio, and suddenly everything else faded away. My parents' arguments, the boredom of school, the loneliness, it all disappeared. There was just the music, raw and real, speaking directly to my heart. It was the most intense feeling I had ever experienced. I knew then that nothing else mattered. Rock and roll was the only thing that made sense. I wasn't alone. My best friend, Pete Shotton, and I were both hooked. We'd sit for hours, listening to Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and all the other rock and roll legends. We'd try to mimic their moves, their voices, their attitude. We were obsessed. It was like we had discovered a secret language, a code that only we could understand. And it was through this music that I found my purpose. I knew I wanted to be a performer, to make people feel the way Elvis made me feel. Performing came naturally to me. I loved the attention, the energy, the way people reacted when I sang. It was like I could control a crowd with my voice, make them feel what I was feeling. My schoolmates would gather around whenever I started singing, and I'd feel this rush of power, like I was finally in my element. It was the only time I felt truly free, but it wasn't just about the music. It was about the rebellion, the defiance, the sense that we could break free from the old ways and create something new. The world was changing, and we were at the forefront. We were part of a generation that refused to be defined by the past, that demanded to be heard. Elvis was more than just a singer to me. He was a symbol of everything I wanted to be. I dressed like him, moved like him, even talked like him. I was determined to be just like him, to capture that magic and make it my own. But as much as I admired him, I also knew I had to find my own path. I couldn't just be a copycat. I had to be John Lennon, not just another Elvis Presley. And so, I began to explore other artists. Little Richard showed me that rock and roll could be wild and unapologetic. Buddy Holly taught me the importance of writing my own songs. Chuck Berry's rhythm and blues influenced my guitar playing. Each of these artists gave me a piece of the puzzle, and I started to piece together my own identity. But it wasn't just about the music. It was about the feeling, the energy, the sense that we were part of something bigger. Rock and roll wasn't just a genre. It was a revolution. It was a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of feeling. And I was determined to be at the forefront of that revolution. When I met Paul McCartney, it was like the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. We were both obsessed with rock and roll, but we had different approaches. Paul was the perfectionist, the one who could write a melody that would stick in your head for days. I was the rebel, the one who pushed boundaries and challenged the status quo. Together, we were unstoppable. We knew we could change the world, and we were determined to do it. The Beatles weren't just a band, we were a force. We were the voice of a generation, the embodiment of a new way of thinking. And it all started with that one song, Heartbreak Hotel. It was the night rock and roll changed my life, and it was just the beginning. I remember the first time I got to play rock and roll at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. It was 1961, and the Cavern was a place for jazz and skiffle music. Skiffle was a mix of American folk, jazz, and country, but it wasn't rock and roll. The Cavern didn't want rock and roll, but I didn't care. I loved rock and roll, and I wanted to play it no matter what. We started our set with a skiffle song, just to keep the peace. But then I announced we were going to play Don't Be Cruel by Elvis Presley. One of the band members, Rod Davis, freaked out. He said, "You can't do that, they'll eat you alive," but I didn't listen. I was a kid who didn't follow the rules. I started playing, and the audience was uneasy, but I kept going. I was on a mission to bring rock and roll to the Cavern, and nothing was going to stop me. I was a bit of a rebel, kind of like the Teddy Boys. These guys wore fancy Edwardian clothes, but were known for being tough and sometimes violent. I didn't want to be violent, but I liked the idea of breaking the rules and starting something new. The Cavern was a big deal in Liverpool, and I knew that if we could bring rock and roll there, we could change the music scene. Paul McCartney, my future bandmate, was different from me. He was smooth and knew how to talk to people. When we met in 1957, it was like magic. We both loved rock and roll, and we clicked right away. Paul had a way of making me better. He taught me how to play guitar and write songs. I was rough around the edges, but Paul helped me polish my skills. We spent hours listening to our favorite songs and trying to play them. We weren't perfect, but that's what made our music special. We had to figure things out on our own, and that's how we developed our unique style. We wanted to play as if we were one mind, feeling the rhythm and the flow of the music. George Harrison joined our band soon after Paul and I met. Having 3 guitarists made us even better. We had to work harder to make our songs sound good, and that pushed us to be more creative. We focused on making our music resonate with the audience. We wanted to give them chills, that feeling of something new and exciting. In 1958, Paul told me he had been writing songs. He played me a song called "I Lost My Little Girl," and I was blown away. That moment was a turning point for us. We realized we could write our own music, and that was huge. It set us on a path to become more than just a band that played covers. We were going to create something new and different. At first, we learned by copying the songs we loved. We played them exactly as they sounded on the records, but as we got better, we started to experiment. We wanted to make music that was truly our own. We mixed different styles and tried new things, like using Indian scales and unusual instruments. We even played with the way we recorded our songs, using tape loops and creating concept albums. The Beatles became more than just a band. We were artists who pushed the boundaries of what rock and roll could be. We were inspired by musicians like Buddy Holly, who showed us that writing our own songs was possible. We looked up to artists like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley, who were the kings of rock and roll. They gave us the courage to be ourselves and create something new. In the end, we transformed the Cavern Club and the music scene in Liverpool. We brought rock and roll to the forefront and showed that it was more than just entertainment. It was a way of life, a way of feeling, and a way of connecting with people. We were part of a bigger movement, one that was changing the world one song at a time. Holly's music had a stiffness that made him more relatable to English teens, compared to the looser style of Elvis Presley. Cliff Richard, for example, made Holly's style seem almost relaxed by comparison. Among the Beatles' main influences, Holly, Chuck Berry, Elvis, and Little Richard, Holly and the Crickets were the only ones who were more popular in England than in America. This made Holly a crucial bridge for the Beatles, helping them connect with American rock and roll while still feeling grounded in their own musical roots, which included skiffle music and the Goons. The Beatles' songwriting process was a lot like Elvis's early days at Sun Studio. They didn't have a set method. They just played around until something clicked. Paul and I, John, would start with a general idea, a feeling, or a melody. We were so immersed in the music we loved that we could draw from it without thinking too much. It was like finding a piece of driftwood on the beach. Songs just seemed to wash up, fully formed and ready to be shaped. When we wrote, we weren't focused on complex lyrics. We wanted hooks, catchy tunes, or phrases that would grab people's attention. Lyrics mattered, but they were more about setting a mood or telling a story, not being deep poetry. It was the music that really mattered, the way it made people feel. Our songs were a mix of all the things we loved, from the wild energy of Little Richard to the more controlled excitement of Buddy Holly. Paul and I had a special connection that made our songwriting work. We were like a mirror to each other. I could see what Paul was doing, and he could see what I was doing. This helped us push each other to be better. We were always playing off each other's strengths, and that made our music more than just the sum of our parts. We weren't just two guys writing songs. We were a team, a unit. Our guitars and voices blended in a way that was greater than anything we could do alone. We also shared a deep emotional bond. Both of our mothers died when we were teenagers. Paul's mom passed away from cancer when he was 14, and my mom was hit by a car and died when I was 17. This shared loss brought us even closer. It was a pain we could only understand together, and it fueled our drive to create something meaningful. After my mom died, I went through a rough period, but Paul's positive energy helped keep the band moving forward. Our personal struggles gave our music a depth that people could feel. The first time we recorded a cover of Buddy Holly's "That'll Be the Day," we put our own spin on it. We added our own intensity and energy, making it our own. This early recording was a sign of what was to come. It showed that we could take what we loved from other artists and turn it into something new and exciting. Our partnership was the key to our success. We complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses, creating a balance that allowed us to push the boundaries of what rock and roll could be. We were always in sync, even when we didn't fully understand why. It was a magical combination that made the Beatles more than just a band. We were a force that changed music forever. After my angry phase in 1959, I, John Lennon, found myself getting pulled back into the music that would define me. Paul and I went to see Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent play in Liverpool in 1960, and it was like a light bulb went off in our heads. Seeing these American rock and roll stars up close made us realize this was exactly what we wanted to do. Their wild stage presence, legs spread wide, bodies moving like crazy, showed us how to really connect with an audience. It was like they were casting a spell over everyone, and we wanted to do the same. We had been dreaming of being real rock and roll musicians for years. For us, that meant going on tour. So when we got the chance to go on a 9-day trip through Scotland with Johnny Gentle, it felt like a huge step forward. It was our first taste of life on the road, and it was magical. We started to put into practice the rock and roll persona we had been imagining for so long. We wanted to make the audience forget everything and just feel the music, to let it take over their bodies and mind. Johnny Gentle noticed something special about Paul and me. He said we operated on a different frequency, like we were on another level. Maybe it was because we had a deep bond, forged through our shared pain and dreams. We were so in sync that we could almost read each other's minds on stage. Our energy was intense, and we were determined to pull our audience out of the boring, conformist world and into something wild and new. But the real turning point came when we went to Hamburg, Germany, a few months after the Scotland tour. Hamburg was a wild city known for its hedonistic, anything-goes attitude. It was the perfect place for us to break free from the rigid rules of British society. We were far from home, away from the people who always tried to bring us down. In Hamburg, we could be whoever we wanted to be. At first, we played a lot of covers, mixing rock and roll with skiffle and pop. We knew the music inside and out, but we were still missing that spark. The audiences in the Reeperbahn, Hamburg's red light district, weren't impressed. They wanted something more raw, more physical. That's when our early manager, Alan Williams, told us to make a show. At first, we were a bit awkward about it. We were British, after all, and we didn't know how to be as free and wild as our American heroes. But we started to loosen up, and I found it hilarious. I started parodying Chuck Berry's Duck Walk, and Alan kept shouting, "That's it, make a show." The club owner, Bruno Koschmider, got in on it too, yelling Machschau, in German, which means show off. It was like a comedy skit, and we found it incredibly funny. But that laughter was exactly what we needed to break free from our inhibitions. We started to move more, to really feel the music, and it transformed our performances. We weren't just playing songs anymore, we were living them. Hamburg was like a rite of passage for us. We were learning how to connect with an audience on a deeper level. We had to adapt to the wild, instinctual energy of the place. It was a bit like stepping into a different world, a world where you could let go of all your worries and just be yourself, and that's what we did. We embraced the freedom, the music, and the laughter, and it made us into the band we were meant to be. When we returned to Liverpool, we were changed. We had a new confidence, a new way of performing that set us apart. We had learned how to use our humor and our energy to connect with people in a way that was both fun and profound. We weren't just a band anymore. We were a force for change. And that's how we started to transform the world, one performance at a time. When we got to Hamburg, things were tough. The music we were making and the way we were playing just wasn't working. But then, something changed. Williams and Koschmider, these older guys who were kind of like mentors, started pushing us. They'd shout at us in both German and English to make a show. It was tough, but it was exactly what we needed. At first, we were just trying to make fun of them. But as we started to throw ourselves around the stage, something shifted. We started to feel free, like we could do anything. It was a mix of being a bit wild, and also being a bit silly. We'd joke around, play the guitars with our elbows, and just let loose. The crowd loved it. They'd pack the Indra, the this small, smoky bar, and everyone would be having a blast. It was like a big, sweaty, wild party. The more we played, the more we realized that this wild, physical performance was what people wanted. It was like we were breaking free from the rules and just being ourselves. We weren't just playing music, we were creating a whole experience. The heat, the smoke, the noise, everything added to it. People weren't just listening, they were feeling it in their bodies. It was like a release. We started to get a reputation for being crazy. John was the leader in this, wearing wacky outfits and mooning the crowd. It might seem tame now, but back then it was really something. People were shocked, but they loved it. We were pushing the boundaries of what was normal, and it felt liberating. The drugs and alcohol helped too. We'd take Preludin, these pills that kept us awake and energized. It wasn't just about staying up, it was about feeling more alive, more intense. Our performances became more and more electric. When our girlfriends, Cynthia and Dot, came to visit, they were blown away by how different we were. We were non-stop, full of energy and excitement. Hamburg changed us. We went from being just another band to being something special. We were on the verge of something big, and everyone could feel it. The transformation wasn't just about the music. It was about how we looked, how we acted, and how we felt. We were becoming the Beatles, and it was happening right there in the Reeperbahn, in the middle of all that chaos. When we came back to Liverpool, people could see the difference. Mo Best, Pete's mom, said it was a revelation to behold. We were a new band with a new energy and a new identity. We were ready to take on the world. I remember the time when everything changed for us, the Beatles. We came back from Hamburg, a city that felt like a different world, and it was like we were a different band. We were wild, raw, and full of energy. The way we played and the way we looked shocked everyone. Dave Forshaw, a promoter, said he'd never seen a band like us before. He said we attacked the crowd with our music, and it was intense. We played with so much aggression and respect for no one. It was a feeling we'd never experienced in Liverpool, and it was electrifying. Pete Best, who was still our drummer at the time, described it best. He said when we finished our first song, the place exploded. People screamed and raised their arms. It was like the crowd was in a trance, and we were the ones casting the spell. We were different, and that difference was what made people sit up and take notice. Our transformation was like a story out of mythology. We went into the underworld of Hamburg's Reeperbahn, a place where rules didn't apply, and we came back changed. It was like we had a deal with the devil, but instead of selling our souls, we found our true selves. We brought back a sound and a style that was raw, visceral, and full of life. It was a sound that made people forget about their worries and just feel. The Cavern Club in Liverpool became our home. It was a small, underground place, but it had soul. It was the perfect spot for our new sound. We played there, and the crowd loved it. Our following grew, and we could feel the energy building. It was like we were part of something bigger, something that was changing the world. Brian Epstein, a local record store owner, saw us play at the Cavern and was hooked. He offered to manage us, and it was a big risk for him. Rock and roll was still seen as a fad, and we were playing a style that no one had heard before. But he believed in us, and we knew we needed someone like him to help us reach a wider audience. We wanted to make it big, and we were willing to do what it took to get there. Epstein helped us clean up our image, but not too much. He wanted us to look polished, but still keep that wild edge. We started wearing suits, but they were stylish and different, a blend of modern and rebellious. We were the mop tops, the polite and lovable Beatles, but underneath, we were still the wild hearts from Hamburg. Our music and our style started a revolution. We weren't just a band, we were a movement. People felt something when they saw us play, something that went beyond words. It was a feeling of freedom, of being part of something new and exciting. We were living our lives on stage, and that authenticity resonated with our audience. The Beatles' journey from the Reeperbahn to the Cavern and beyond was a story of transformation. We went from being a struggling band to becoming a cultural icon. We brought a new energy to the world, and it spread like wildfire. We were at the forefront of a cultural shift, and we were just getting started. I remember the Beatles as more than just a band. They were a phenomenon, a cultural revolution. What made them different from other pop stars of the time, like Cliff Richard or Elvis Presley post-Army, was their authenticity. They had a realness that resonated with people, especially the mods, who were all about being true to yourself. This authenticity was always at the core of the Beatles, even when their manager, Brian Epstein, tried to make them more professional and polished. Inside the band, there was a constant tension between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. John was the rebel, always pushing boundaries, while Paul was more practical and business savvy. This tension was like a spark that kept the Beatles' music fresh and exciting. It was the same kind of tension that existed between the band and Epstein. Epstein wanted them to be more commercial, but the Beatles had to balance that with their artistic integrity. This balance is what made them unique and allowed them to stay relevant for so long. In the early days, the Beatles were a raw, unpolished group. They played in clubs, smoked, drank, and cursed on stage. They didn't have a set list and would often stop mid-song if someone in the crowd requested a different one. Epstein saw this and knew they needed to change if they wanted to make it big. He taught them to dress better, be more professional, and even added a bow to their performances. At first, John wasn't too keen on the bow, but Paul saw the value in it. They had to make some concessions to the music industry, but they never lost their edge. The relationship between John and Paul was complex. They both loved rock and roll, but their approaches were different. John preferred a more dissonant, raw sound, while Paul favored a more melodic, structured style. These differences often led to friction, but they also pushed the band to new heights. They were like two sides of the same coin, and together, they created something truly special. In 1962, the Beatles had a demo tape that didn't do them justice. It was a recording of one of their live shows, and the sound quality was poor. When they auditioned for Decca Records, they chose songs that they thought would appeal to the executives, like Three Cool Cats and Bisama Macho. But the performance lacked the energy and excitement that made them so unique. They were trying too hard to be what they thought the industry wanted, and it backfired. John later said they should have rocked like mad and shown their true selves. Despite their rejection, the Beatles didn't give up. They continued to play in Liverpool and Hamburg, refining their sound and performance. They learned that to succeed, they had to stay true to who they were while also making concessions to the industry. This balancing act was difficult, but it was what made them great. Eventually, Brian Epstein brought them to Parlophone Records, a smaller label that was willing to take a chance on them. George Martin, the head of A&R, saw something special in the Beatles and decided to work with them. Parlophone was known for comedy and classical music, but Martin saw the potential for something new. The Beatles' unique blend of raw energy and polished professionalism was a perfect fit. The Beatles' journey was a constant negotiation between art and commerce, between their authentic selves and the demands of the music industry. They managed to walk this tightrope for years, creating some of the most groundbreaking and beloved music of all time. Their success was a testament to their ability to stay true to themselves, while also appealing to a wide audience. This is what made the Beatles not just a band, but a cultural icon. When I walked into Abbey Road Studios on that day in June 1962, I felt like we were stepping into a whole new world. We had played in dingy clubs and smoky bars, but this place was different. It was clean, bright, and full of high-tech machines that made us feel like we were stepping into the future, but it was also a bit intimidating. We were just a bunch of lads from Liverpool, and suddenly we were in a fancy studio in London, where everything was so precise and professional. George Martin, our producer, was a bit of a mystery to us. He didn't seem that impressed with our music at first. He told us our songs were mediocre, and that our covers were pedestrian. It was a tough pill to swallow, especially after we had worked so hard to get to this point. But there was something in his voice, a hint of curiosity, that kept us from giving up. He heard something in us, maybe it was John's rough voice or the raw energy we brought, and he decided to give us a chance. Our time in Hamburg had been a crucible. We had played long hours, sometimes until our hands bled, and we had learned to survive the tough crowds. We had also lost our friend Stuart Sutcliffe, which was a deeply painful moment. But it seemed to push us harder, to play with more passion and determination. When we returned to Liverpool, we were a different band. We had a sound that was uniquely ours, and it was starting to catch on. But the real test was still ahead of us. We had to prove ourselves in the studio. The atmosphere at Abbey Road was so different from the clubs we knew. It was like stepping into a laboratory, where every sound was measured and controlled. We were used to the wild energy of live performances, but now we had to adapt to a new way of making music. We were nervous, but we were also determined to show what we could do. Martin and his team pushed us hard. They didn't mince words, and they told us exactly what they thought. It was tough to hear, but it was exactly what we needed. They saw potential in us, and they believed we could do better. They helped us refine our sound, and they encouraged us to write better songs. It was a learning experience, and it changed us in ways we never expected. Looking back, that day at Abbey Road was a turning point. It was where we went from being a local band to becoming something more. We had faced the establishment, and we had passed the test. We didn't know it then, but that session was the beginning of a journey that would take us to the top of the world. We were still the same guys from Liverpool, but we had the tools and the confidence to make something special. In the years that followed, Abbey Road became our second home. We spent countless hours there, experimenting and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the studio. We turned a place that was all about precision and control into a playground for our creativity. We learned to blend the raw energy of our live performances with the technical wizardry of the studio, and it was a magical combination. We became known for our innovative sound, our catchy melodies, and our profound lyrics. We wrote songs that spoke to a generation, and we changed the way people thought about music. We were part of a movement, a cultural revolution, and we were at the forefront of it all. But even as we reached the heights of fame, we never forgot where we came from. We were still the same guys who had dreamed big and worked hard to make it happen. And when we played that last impromptu concert on the rooftop of Abbey Road Studios in 1969, John's words summed it all up. I hope we passed the audition. We had, and more than that, we had changed the world.